Welcome back to another reading and correcting of A Familiar Death. With me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and I, the Tiger's Supervisor. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And today we are doing Chapter 9. So, Trevor said, looking out the window at the field they were driving by. No one here hunts? He'd been looking forward to seeing Marlot's whole hunting grounds last night, but after the day they'd had, Trevor understood his desire to just find a place to hide in and snuggle. This morning he'd been excited again, but they'd stop at a restaurant to eat and grab the last available booth. He'd ask why, but his wolf had waited until they were done eating to say those baffling words. Now Trembor couldn't stop thinking about it. Doesn't anyone realize how wrong that is? It's the way it's always been. I told you they do things differently. Trevor looked at Marlot, who was driving with one hand on the wheel, the other arm resting out the window. I thought you meant that for how prey and predators don't mix. This is beyond different. It's, I don't know, crazy? How does Jay cope with everyone if everyone eats there? Marlot chuckled. They don't all eat at the restaurant. Most people eat at home. Then how do they get their meat if they don't hunt? They buy it at the processing store. And where does the store get it from? The commune? Trevor stared at Marlot. You're kidding. They found a way to grow meat from plants? His wolf looked at him, just long enough to roll his eyes. Then how? The old farmers, the infirm, those who suffer serious injuries. Anyone who can't keep up with their work goes to the store. Just like that, they walk in. They go by car, Marlot replied. It said a casual tone. Trevor had trouble believing he'd heard the words. Why would they do that? Don't they want to live? They're farmers. They aren't like us. What else are they going to do once they can't do that anymore? And the rest of them, the other prey, other farmers, they're okay with it? They couldn't be, Trevor thought. No one could be okay with just letting someone walk to their death. Dying from a hunt was one thing. That was part of the way. That was the way of life. But to just give in? Even vagrants who barely did anything to stay alive ran if they realized they were becoming someone's prey. His wolf tapped his finger on the steering wheel, clearly thinking. If you had a choice, Marlot finally said, between having the old folks around and being scared all the time, or not having them and knowing you're safe, that there's someone who'll protect you, what would you pick? That's how should I know? I'm not prey. I don't know what it's like living with constant fear. I can tell you it isn't fun. Marlot slowed the car behind a large machine that had to be for farming, then drove around it. Trevor looked at it in awe. The discussion momentarily forgotten. He knew he shouldn't be amazed at it. He'd seen far larger machines in construction zone. But there was something unsettling at seeing this thing amble along the road with only a sheep at the control. That's the situation they're in, his wolf continued when Trevor was looking ahead again. I'm not saying this is better than the city. It's just it's just a different system. Here, the predators protect the prey instead of hunting them, and in return, they get to eat the unproductive one. How does that even work? Killing them. It's one thing for me to kill my prey in a hunt, but if one of them walked up to me and asked to be killed, I can do it. Marlot nodded. That's the butcher's job. He gives them something to make them fall asleep, then bleeds them. It's less painful for them than being killed in a hunt, or also less stressful. You've seen it done? My father took me when I was younger, back when he expected me to take over for him once he retired. Marlot tried to envision it, watching some bull walk into a room, lie down to sleep, and never get up. But he couldn't. It went against everything he knew. If this was how you grew up, how did you survive in the city? How did you even know you'd have to hunt? Marlot didn't answer immediately. Again, the fingers tapped the steering wheel. After Margelo died, he paused, began to speak again, but stopped. He sighed. I knew I couldn't stay here all my life. I had no idea when or how I'd manage it, but I would stick it. I would stick to our promise and leave. So I did something very few people here do. I researched cities. I load car swiftly and hurried to close the window as a small cloud of insect came at the car. That's how I learned I'd have to hunt. As for how I learned, I was a kid, so I made a game of it with my friends, playing prey. Half of us would be prey, the other predators, and we'd have the whole day to capture or kill our target. At first, it was just a game, but as we grew older, we kept playing it and we became more serious about it. He ran the wipers to clear off the few bugs that hit the windshield. I have an idea of how prey feel because on those days when I was prey, I was a nervous wreck. I couldn't know when I'd be attacked, but I knew it was coming. I wanted to survive the day, but none of us as prey ever had. Maybe we just can't think like them enough, but the predator always got their prey before the day was over. Never knowing when the end would hit was nerve-wracking. He glanced at Trembor. As a predator, you don't worry about that. I don't know any who does. We know we might end up as someone's prey one day, but the concept is so far out there it doesn't impact us. Statistically, you're more likely to die in a car accident than from being hunted. Didn't you ever play that kind of game yourself? I always figured that cubs in the city had to do that all the time to grow up hunting. I wrestled with my brothers and sisters, Trevor answered, but that was about learning how to fight, not hunt. My mom's taught me that. He paused. How does their tax get collected? The government gets a fixed amount per body. It isn't based on their productivity rating? Marlot shook his head. They don't have one. How can they not have a productivity rating? Everyone has one. They don't have an ID, so there's nothing to attach a rating to. Trevor stared at Marlot. The wolf continued. It'd be too much of a problem trying to keep track of all of them. It isn't like they'll leave the commune, so why give them the extra work? And how would they go about calculating the productivity of a single farmer? But without a rating, anyone can just come in and eat them, which is why the town has patrols to prevent poaching. Tremor looked out the window at the passing field covered with greens. He didn't get it. He didn't think it would matter how much his wolf explained things. It was just too different from what he knew. What's growing in that field? He asked to have something else to think about. I don't know. Could be one of a dozen vegetables. How many vegetables are there? Trevor asked, realizing he never paid much attention to the selection when he shopped. Peppers and potatoes were what he bought to go with his meat. His parents were partial to green beans and olives. He tried to remember how the selection looked in the store, but he couldn't recall it. Reynolds laughed. I am not the right person to ask. Before Trembor could comment, they crested a hill and buildings became visible in the distance. A dozen low and large buildings, overshadowed by hundreds of smaller ones. Figured the small ones were houses. What are those big buildings? He asked. The smaller one of them is where they process the vegetables. The others are warehouses where they are kept until they are shipped to the cities. I didn't realize you needed that much warehousing. It's got to be held somewhere until it's needed. Trevor nodded. I just didn't realize how much was being grown. There's a lot of prey in the city. It's got to come from somewhere. So the field produces all year long? Doesn't it get too cold in the winter? Marlot nodded. This is the last harvest of this season. There won't be anything planted until spring, but after that it's going to be constantly green. They drove by the first large building, where sheep and horses pushed cart with crates on them. There's a lot of sheep here, Trevor commented. They're the most common farmers. There are also some horses and bulls for more labor-intensive work. So they do all the farming by hand? Of course not. They're not primitive. You saw the tractor on the road. That can be done with machine. What can be done with machine is done with them. What needs to be done by hand is done that way. Why are all the houses built the same way? Trevor asked once they passed the warehouses. They were all the same shape, 2 stories with peaked roof and a porch. Only the colors change, being a variety of bright color. That's before my time. Marlot slowed to let a group of playing cubs run by. My father says sheeps like those things to be the same. Until I moved to the city, I figured he was right, but I expect it was just easier and cheaper to get the houses mass-produced. Trevor looked at the almost identical houses with the mothers sitting on the porch watching the cubs. I don't think I could stand living here. I couldn't either. Does anyone ever leave? Marl shrugged. It must happen. Not everyone's cut out for the farming life, even here. So there's a system in place for them to get an ID and a productivity rating. Has to be. No one is forced to remain. They left the residential area, and Marlot accelerated. I never thought to ask about it when I lived here. Just the way things are. We don't think about it. They drove through another residential area, and again Marlot slowed. It was almost an exact copy of the previous one, down to the mothers on the porch and the cubs playing in the street. Not long after this, they came to a group of buildings, larger than the houses, but not as large as the warehouses. Sheep were going from one to the other, as well as some cows and horses. They all had bags over their shoulders. Town center? Trevor asked. Marlowe chuckled. Not really at the center, but yeah, this is where the stores are, as well as a bar, restaurant, and medical clinic. Same as in any town, except that all these buildings look the same. They were twice the size of the horses, twice the size of the houses, also 2 stories, but with flat roofs. If you want, you can ask them about it. I'm sure someone knows about why it was built this way. Trevor looked around and realized that all the people were also dressed in similar ways to one another. To be honest, I'd rather not know. I'm already a little creeped out by the number of sheeps out there. Can't help feeling like if I talk to one of them, they're all going to answer together with one voice. He shuddered a little. I think someone made a horror movie of that when I was a kid. Marlowe chuckled as he parked his car between 2 trucks. We have nothing to worry about. Everyone is perfectly normal. He pointed along the stores. The medical clinic should be a couple of buildings that way. They got out of the car, and Marlowe nodded to the passing males and females as he took out his pad and locked the doors. He had it back in his pocket before catching Trembor grinning at him. What? Are you afraid someone is going to steal your car? What do you mean? You locked it up. Iskar took out his pad and checked. Must have been by reflex. Put it away and indicated the direction they needed to go in. He greeted the passing sheep, and Trevor was surprised that none of them exhibited any sign of nervousness as they returned the greeting. Some of them stared at Tremor, but then nodded and continued on. He watched them and couldn't shake the sense this was wrong. It took him a moment to figure out why. They weren't getting out of his way. None of them glanced around nervously. They walked around confidently, and on some level, Tremor was thinking of them as predator, which was insane. They were sheep. Now he understood that a lot of that sense was in the body language, not just the species. No, that wasn't quite right. He'd known that, but it had been the norm. Now he was seeing a different way for them to live, one where they were on equal footing with the predators. How had Marlowe managed to grow up knowing what it meant to be a predator in a place like this? He almost walked past Marlowe when he stopped. This is it. Trembor got out of his head. got out of his head. The building was a box like the others, but this one had a sign over the door which said medical. They entered, and it looked nothing like the medical clinic he'd gone to. The waiting area was empty, a dozen chairs on an earth-brown carpet with no one in them. The two walls were sky blue, and the air smelled clean, but not in that saturated with disinfectant clean the way the clinics usually had. Right. The two walls were sky blue, and the air smelled clean, but not in that saturated with disinfectant clean way them usually did. Even Jaxca's clinic smelled like that. This smelled like outside air, away from any vehicle. A half wall separated the waiting area from the treatment area, which was half a dozen beds and tables, only 2 of which were occupied. A muscular horse, his arm in a sling, was sitting on one, and the other had a very pregnant sheep lying back on it. A ram in a gray jacket was running his hand on her stomach, talking to her in a voice too soft for Tremble to hear. He looked up and noticed them. Is this an emergency? No, Marlot replied. We just need your help with something. Have a seat then. If no one else comes in, I'll be with you once I've seen to Arashal. He nodded to the horse. Trevor sat so he could watch the medic. The ram helped the sheep stand. I want you to take it easy. You have a week at the most to go. You can do light housework, but I'd prefer you rest. I'd prefer that you know what? I'd prefer you rest. She nodded and waddled out of the clinic. The ram went to the horse. Why are you back here? My arm hurts again, the horse answered. The medic gently took it out of the sling, and the horse bit his lower lip. Arashal, I told you to rest your arm. It can't heal when you work in the field. The stone had some annoyance in it, and Tremor got the sense this wasn't the first time he'd had to deal with this situation. I didn't, the horse began, only to stop when the ram locked eyes with him. Just so bored. Everyone but me's working. I've got nothing to do. I went there to keep them company, but then Dad had trouble with one of the bales, and I didn't think about it. And helped him. The ram explored the arm by touch. You're lucky. It didn't do any more damage, but if you don't rest, you could tear the muscle completely. If that happens, you're looking at months for it to heal, and that'll take years off your work life. You don't want that, do you, Arashal? The horse looked at his arm. No, sir. Then I want you to go home and rest. I know it's boring, but that's what you have to endure if you want to get back in the field anytime soon. Place the arm back in the sling. Come back next week and we'll see how well it's healed. When you get home, tell your father to contact me. If he's having trouble in the field, I'll have to look at his back again. Yes, sir. The horse hopped down and left, nodding to Marlot and Trembor as he walked by. Work life? Trembor asked, standing when the ram joined them. The medic studied him. You're not from around here, are you? He didn't wait for Trembor to answer. Harashel needs both arms to do his work. His family aligns the hay bales so the trucks can pick them up. He won't feel it now while he's young, but if he doesn't let his arm heal properly as he gets older, it's going to hurt more and more, to the point where he won't be able to lift the bales. What happens then? He goes to the processor. Just like that, there has to be something else he can do. Bale pulling is all he's done. By the time he'll feel the pain, it'll be too late for him to learn anything new. But Marlot placed a hand on his arm. I told you, things are different here. The medic studied Marlot. You're a black claw, aren't you? You have fluffy fur and you have Calyce's coloring. I'm his son, Marlot, and you're Urian Roundpoint, correct? I am. I'm a registered investigator. I'm looking into Nahego's death. I left you a message this morning letting you know we're coming. This is Trembor. We work together. The ram took out his pad and showed it to Marlot. It was off. Ran out of power again. Forgot to put in a charger last night. You should move the charging station closer to where you tend to leave your pad. That way you're sure it's charged, Marlot said. Trembor kept himself from smiling, happy not to be on the receiving end of his wolf's text advice for once. I should. My mate was in charge of our pads, but she had an accident last year. I've been on my own since, shook his head. But that isn't important. What can I help you with? Our medical examiner can't travel here. He's based in the city and has clients to see. We need your expertise to look at Naego's body. I'm heading to the mass commune after this, Orion said. Once I'm done updating the files, I already have a handful of patients waiting there for me. And after that, I'm going to Rosette's commune. Can you ask one of the other medics? You're the best medic in the region, so I'd prefer if it was you. If you're worried about getting in trouble with the town council, you don't have to. Right now, for this case, my authority supersedes theirs. The ram thought about it. All right, I'm going to have to make a few calls first, and I still have to update the files. I can't have Arashal be treated like by another medic who isn't aware he added to the strain. Do you get a lot of those injuries? Trembor asked. Strained muscles? He looked at the unresponsive pad, then around the room. Among the horses and bulls, that's the majority of them. And the sheep's? It's pregnancies. I get at least a new one every day. You'll have to excuse me. I need to figure out where the charger is. He indicated his pad. I'll be right back. Marlot nodded and sat. A moment later, Trembor joined him. And that concludes chapter 9 of a familiar death. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next one's going to be, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the book as well as the others in the series, they are available on all major e-retailers. If you want to support me, that's on my Patreon, when you can also get access to just about everything I've written. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.